In July 2014, a 26-year-old tourist from San Diego, Melissa Hunt, disappeared. She was last seen on July 28 in the village of Healy, near Denali National Park. 8 years later, two fishermen accidentally stumbled upon an abandoned hunting lodge. Inside, there was soup on the table, still steaming. Next to it was an old compass with the letters MH engraved on it. Melissa Hunt was born in San Diego on April the 22nd, 1988. At first glance, her life seemed ordinary. Office work, a rented apartment, weekly meetings with friends in coffee shops on the coast. But everyone who knew Melissa well said that for her, the routine was just a cover. She was always looking for more, a sense of danger, of true nature, of trials that test a person's strength. At the age of 26, she already had a strong reputation as a talented graphic designer. In the small studio where she worked, she was appreciated for her accuracy and attention to detail. She could spend hours choosing a font for a logo or a shade of color for an advertising banner. Colleagues recalled that during her night shifts, Melissa always took a travel notebook out of her backpack and, while the computer was processing files, made notes about the routes she planned to take. Traveling was her true passion. When she was a child, her father, a former sailor, took his daughter on trips along the Pacific coast. She quickly learned how to pitch a tent, navigate with a map, and not be afraid of the night. Her mother, an English literature teacher, taught her to record her impressions on paper. Since then, each of Melissa's trips has been accompanied by dozens of pages of notes and hundreds of photos. In July of 2014, she decided to fulfill her dream trip, to go to Alaska. 2 weeks before her departure, she wrote in her personal blog, "I want to see the land where man is only a guest, where you can't hear the noise of highways, only the wind and the cries of birds." Her friends treated it as her next adventure, but Melissa was preparing seriously. She bought new equipment, ordered special maps, and consulted with tourist guides in Seattle. On July 23rd, she said goodbye to her mother. The call lasted a few minutes. Her mother recalled, "She spoke quickly, as if she was in a hurry. She only said, 'I'll take the pendant, you know it's my amulet.'" It was a silver pendant in the shape of a wave that Melissa had been wearing since her youth. On July the 24th at 9:30 in the morning, she posted her last photo on social media, a picture from an airplane window above white clouds with the caption, "On my way to Alaska, a dream come true." It was her last public signal. In the evening of the same day, she landed in Fairbanks. The airport cameras captured it, Melissa walking through the terminal wearing a light jacket and carrying a large gray backpack. The administration of the Pioneer Inn hostel confirmed that she had checked in for 2 nights at 20 past 20, paid in cash, and asked for a map of the area. She left a short line in the guest book, "Getting ready for Denali. If I don't come back, at least I tried." Late in the evening, at 23:45, she called her mother again. The operator's recording showed the call lasting 2 minutes. She said that everything was fine, that the city seemed calm, and that she would be going to the village of Kili tomorrow morning. This was the last confirmed contact with the family. The next morning, on July 25th, a hostel resident who shared a room with her recalled, "She was laying out her gear as methodically as if she were going on a month-long hike. She checked the batteries, put the canned food away, and smiled to herself." It was the last night of Melissa Hunt's peaceful life. In a few days, her name would become known throughout Alaska as another hiker who disappeared without a trace in the shadow of the majestic mountains and dark forests of Denali. The morning of July 25, 2014, began for Melissa Hunt with a wait for a bus. According to the driver of the intercity bus, she got on at a bus stop near her hostel in Fairbanks at about 7:30 in the morning. The witness described the girl as calm, with a large backpack and a folded tourist map in her hands. She bought a ticket to the small village of Healy, the gateway to Denali National Park. At 9:20, the bus stopped on the main street of Healy. The small town went about its daily life. A few coffee shops, a gas station, and a grocery store where locals replenished their supplies before heading out into the forests. It was there that Melissa was last seen on surveillance cameras. A recording from the Totem grocery store's camera has been preserved in police archives. The video shows a young woman in a light jacket entering the store at 9:35 in the morning. She buys canned food, candy bars, and batteries for a flashlight. At the cash register, she also buys a printed map of the area. The cashier, who was later interviewed by investigators, recalled, "She asked about the path to the old fishing camp. I told her that people rarely go there because the road is difficult. She just smiled." About 20 minutes after leaving the store, Melissa was spotted by a truck driver on the side of the road heading south. The man, whose name was Robert Klein, later told police that the girl had stopped him with a gesture and asked him for a ride a few kilometers. He agreed. According to him, Melissa was polite and calm, spoke with a slight admiration for the beauty of the local mountains, and said that it was her first time in Alaska. Robert drove her to a branch of the dirt road and dropped her off because he was turning in the other direction. It was about 10:30 in the morning. From there, Melissa set off on foot. She intended to reach the park's entrance point, which led to a trail east of the main road. Cameras in a small ranger lodge recorded her arrival. At 10:45 in the morning, she made an entry in the visitor's log. M. Hunt, San Diego, solo route, estimated return on July 27th. This entry was the last official trace of her presence. A warden, a ranger named Thomas Becker, later recalled, "She looked prepared. A big backpack, normal clothes, a map in her hands. We had no reason to doubt her experience." He noticed that Melissa asked for directions to the old camp, which she had asked about in the store. The ranger explained that the place was little known, but the road there branched off the official trail a few kilometers deep into the forest. It is there that her route becomes invisible. There are no further photos or videos. There is only the testimony of one hiker, a man from Minnesota, who later claimed to have seen a woman with a large gray backpack on the trail at around 11 o'clock. He could not recognize her face, but the description matched Melissa's belongings. These few morning hours on July 25th were the last times Melissa Hunt's presence could be documented. Cameras, store receipts, entries in the visitor's log, all of this created a clear line of events. Then comes the silence that cannot be explained. Melissa Hunt's disappearance became apparent the next day. She had written in the park's visitor log that she planned to return on July the 27th. When this did not happen, the rangers did not raise the alarm at first. Tourists often stayed late, staying for another day or two. But in the evening of July 28, Melissa's mother, who had not received any messages from her daughter, called the park administration. She insisted that her daughter had always been in touch and had never disrupted her own schedule. On July 29th at 7 in the morning, rangers began an official search. The first step was to check the road where Melissa had been dropped off by the truck driver. All the evidence confirmed that at 10:30 she had indeed set off on foot in the direction of the Eastern Trail. After a few hundred meters, the rangers found sole prints that roughly matched the size of her boots. Then the trail was lost among the stones. By lunchtime, they formed the first search group of 10 people, including 4 rangers and 6 volunteers from the local community. Their route was along the main trail and to the place where the branch to the old camp was located. They did not find any items or traces. On July 30th, a helicopter was used in the operation. The pilot, Thomas Nichols, reported in his report that he had been flying over an area of more than 30 square kilometers for 3 hours. The altitude allowed him to see lawns, riverbanks, and open rocky areas. But none of them showed a person, a camp, or even the remains of a fire. That same day, search dogs were brought in and given Melissa's T-shirt to sniff out, which was provided by the hostel in Fairbanks. At first, it seemed that one of the dogs was confidently heading in the direction of the Eastern Trail, but after a kilometer, the scent disappeared. Subsequent attempts ended with the same result. The scent broke off in the depths of the forest, as if it had been washed away by heavy rains or scattered by the wind. On July 31st, the number of searchers exceeded 50. There were volunteers from Anchorage, several tourist guides, and even a group of students who were vacationing in Denali. Everyone was divided into sectors. They combed kilometer after kilometer, shouting the name of the missing person. But the only response was silence and echoes in the mountains. Official versions emerged at the first headquarters meetings. The most likely was an attack by a wild animal. Bears and wolves were often seen in these places. If she had come across them alone, she had almost no chance of survival. The second version is that she fell into a gorge. The terrain here is complicated, numerous stone faults hidden by dense shrubbery. A person could have stumbled and ended up where even a helicopter could not see him. The third version is hypothermia. In the mountains, even in July, the temperature can drop to 0 at night. A tourist without proper shelter risked freezing in a few hours. Melissa's family arrived in Alaska on August 1st. Her mother, Susan Hunt, demanded at every briefing that the search continue. She's prepared, she's strong, she may have gotten lost, but she's still alive. Her father was more reserved, but he and other relatives went out into the woods with the volunteers every day. During the first week, they surveyed more than 40 kilometers of trails, gorges, and riverbeds. They used thermal imagers, checked caves, looked for traces of fires or abandoned items. But nothing. Only once, on August 3rd, did the rangers come across a torn bag of candy bars that Melissa had bought at Totem Grocery. But experts could not prove that this particular bag belonged to her. On August 4th, the search was expanded again. A group from the National Guard, 2 more helicopters and special units with climbing equipment arrived to help. The result was the same, not a single trace. On August 10th, the official headquarters admitted that the probability of finding Melissa alive was minimal. The search was scaled back, leaving only a small group of rangers to make periodic checks. The family disagreed. They hired a private investigator from Seattle. He spent a month surveying the surrounding area, interviewing hunters and local residents. He found no new evidence, but wrote in his report, "The disappearance looks unnatural, as if someone had deliberately erased all traces." In September 2014, the case was officially reclassified as unsolved. Another volume of helicopter photos, search reports, and blank forms appeared in the Fairbanks Police Department archives, with no confirmed evidence. For the family, it was the end of hope, but not the end of waiting. Every year, they appealed to local authorities, demanding that the search be resumed, and sent photos of their daughter to newspapers. But officially, Melissa Hunt's case remained unanswered. Her name was added to the list of those who disappeared in the wilds of Alaska. August of 2022 was warmer than usual in Alaska. In the Tanana River area, locals said that the forest was breathing differently, a lot of rain, but also warm nights that made the walls of old hunting huts smell damp and mushroomy. It was then that 2 fishermen from Fairbanks, brothers Harold and Matthew Brown, set out on a multi-day hike north of the village of Healy. Their route ran along a small tributary that flowed into the Tanana. According to them, they were looking for places where large pike were rumored to be found. On the 3rd day of the hike, on August 7th, around 5 in the evening, the brothers turned off the main trail into a dense spruce forest. The weather was deteriorating, and they decided to find shelter before dark. It was then that Matthew noticed the outline of an old building through the trees. It was a small wooden house with a sloping roof, the windows of which were boarded up. From the looks of it, it had been standing there for decades. But the fishermen were most impressed by the fact that smoke was rising from the chimney in a thin strip. They cautiously walked closer and smelled the smell of hot food. The door was unlocked. Inside, the brothers saw a picture that immediately alarmed them. There was a pot of soup on the stove, still steaming. A cup of coffee was on the table, with a spoon and fork neatly placed next to it. The table was covered with a clean cloth with 2 plates on it, as if someone was about to sit down to dinner with a guest. There was a strange silence in the room, broken only by the crackling of wood in the stove. The brothers called out, hoping that the owner was about to come out. But the house was empty. The bed was unmade, and the shelves were filled with old cans dating back to the 90s. Everything looked as if the hut had been abandoned for a long time, but at the same time, as if someone had just left it for a few minutes. The fisherman saw a small metal thing on the table. It was a compass with a worn cover. When Harold picked it up, he noticed the engraved letters, M.H. He immediately remembered the story of the missing tourist who had been in the newspapers a few years earlier. The initials matched her name, Melissa Hunt. The brothers were scared, but decided not to touch anything else. They left the house and the next day notified the police in Healy. Rangers arrived on the scene on the morning of August 8th. The report states, "The soup pot was still warm, the coffee grounds were fresh, no traces of unauthorized persons were found around the house." The discovery of the compass was officially recorded. It was seized for examination. Other items did not look modern: old towels, peeling dishes, broken kerosene lamps. But the very fact that there was warm food in the hut, which was estimated to have been unused for years, was a real shock. Local newspapers ran headlines the very next day. "The mysterious cabin in the woods," and "Is Melissa Hunt back?" The articles quoted the fisherman as saying, "We were sure the owner was about to come in. We had never felt so cold inside, even with the stove on." The police did not make any hasty statements. But the very fact that the compass with the missing tourist's initials was found in the hut with hot soup turned the case around. For the first time in 8 years, investigators had an object that directly linked an unknown place deep in the forest to the disappearance of Melissa Hunt. On August 8, 2022, a group of rangers and county police officers arrived at the cabin reported by the Brown brothers. The cabin was deep in the woods, several hours away from the nearest road. It was accessible only by a narrow path that had long been overgrown with moss and juniper. The inspection began with a note of the appearance. The walls were darkened by time, the roof was partially sagging, and the windows were boarded up. According to experts, the building could be at least 30 years old. There was a rusty lock on the door, but no signs of a fresh break-in were found. The report states, "The lock is old, the key was found on the inside." This meant that the last person to leave the room had locked himself out. And then, for some unknown reason, the door was left open. Inside, the discrepancy was immediately apparent. Old, abandoned objects next to fresh traces of presence. According to the Brown brothers, when they entered the hut on August 7th, steam was still coming out of the pot on the stove, and the coffee smelled like it had just been brewed. When the police arrived the next day, the food had already cooled down, but still looked fresh. The broth hadn't spoiled, and the grounds in the cup were still moist. This meant that someone had been here just a few hours before the fishermen arrived. On the shelves were newspapers with dates from the 90s, yellowed, crumpled, and covered with dust. In the corner hung rusted traps, several old kerosene lamps, and broken cans. It all looked as if the hut had been abandoned decades ago. The main object of attention was a metal compass lying on the table. The initials M.H. were engraved on its lid. The police knew the story of the missing tourist Melissa Hunt and immediately seized the compass as a key piece of evidence. No other modern items were found in the house. No plastic bottles, electronic devices, or recent clothing. Only this food on the table, which did not match the overall picture of neglect. The officers also noticed the floor. It was covered with a layer of dust, but in several places, blurred shoe prints were clearly visible. It seemed that someone had walked here recently and deliberately tried to cover their steps. Due to the remoteness of the area and the lack of necessary equipment on site, it was decided to conduct only an initial inspection. All the circumstances were recorded on photos and video. The compass was packed in a container and sent to the laboratory. The house was sealed, and it was decided to return in a few days with a full-fledged forensic team, including specialists in biological and trace evidence. The team leader's report stated, "The site shows signs of recent activity. It is necessary to return with additional resources. The risk of losing the traces is high." Thus, investigators had the first material evidence in 8 years that directly linked the mysterious house to Melissa Hunt. But it raised more questions than answers. Who left the warm food? Why was there a compass with her initials among the old things? And why did someone try so hard to erase their own traces? The news of the found hut spread like wildfire. Already on August 9, 2022, local newspapers ran loud headlines. A ghost house in the woods of Denali. The mysterious return of Melissa Hunt? Photos of the old building went viral on social media, and in a few days the story was picked up by national TV channels. The compass with the initials MH was in the center of attention. The police confirmed the discovery, but officially refrained from commenting. This only fueled rumors. Some journalists wrote that Melissa could have been living as a hermit in the depths of the forest all these years. Others claimed that someone else had used the hut and left her belongings there to confuse the investigation. Experts made contradictory assessments. Some tourist guides emphasized that it was almost impossible to survive alone in that area for 8 years without regular food supplies. Others mentioned that there were isolated cases of hermits living in the taiga for decades, subsisting on hunting and fishing. The soup and coffee found on the table only exacerbated these discussions. Some believed that this was evidence of the recent presence of an unknown person, while others thought it was a carefully planned staging. The compass examination attracted special attention. 2 weeks later, the laboratory released the results. Micro traces of blood were found on the case. DNA analysis showed that it belonged to a woman. At this stage, they had not yet had time to compare it with the genetic material of the Hunt family. But the very fact that female blood was found on an object that was directly linked to the missing tourist became a sensation. On August 10th, the district attorney's office announced the resumption of the official investigation into the Melissa Hunt case. The case, which was transferred to the archive as unsolved in 2014, has now been returned to active status. For the first time in 8 years, the tourist's name was again mentioned in official police reports. The press reacted instantly. Tabloid journalists cited testimonies from local hunters. "We saw a light in the forest a few years ago. We thought it was poachers." Others recalled stories about a hermit who had allegedly been living in the mountains since the 90s and avoiding people. On the forums, users argued whether Melissa could have become his hostage. Meanwhile, the police released their preliminary findings. The report stated, "The compass is material evidence. Traces of female blood were found on the surface. The origin of the liquid is being established. The circumstances of the object's stay in the hut are unknown." The first briefing with the family of the missing person in many years was held in Fairbanks. Melissa's mother, Susan, told reporters, "I knew she left us a sign. She was there, in that house. We have to find the truth." Meanwhile, discussions in the expert community were only getting more heated. Anthropologists argued that the hut could have been used by someone else because the things in it looked too old to be the home of a modern person. Forensic experts emphasized, fresh food on the table indicates an active presence just a few hours before the fishermen arrived. The question, who lived there, became the main one. Was it Melissa herself, or was someone else using her compass? Why did they leave the warm food, and where did they disappear to? The official investigation started with renewed vigor. Criminalists from Anchorage were dispatched to Denali, and additional searches were ordered in the neighborhood. But even at this stage, it was clear that the Melissa Hunt case had turned from an archival case into one of Alaska's most notorious mysteries. After the case was officially reopened in August of 2022, people in Healy and the surrounding villages began to talk again about old stories that had been whispered for many years. Local residents recalled the legend of the so-called Hermit of Denali. According to legend, in the 80s, a man lived in these mountains who avoided any contact with people. He was seen only a few times, emaciated, with a long beard, dressed in animal skins. He never entered towns and disappeared into the forests as soon as anyone approached. There was no official confirmation of his existence, but police reports contained several references to an unknown traveler who was never identified. Old-timers told journalists, "When we were children, our parents scared us not to go far into the woods. They said there was a man living there who stole food and could attack. We didn't know if it was true or not, but we were all afraid." These stories had long been considered local folklore, but after the hut and compass were found, they became more acute. At the same time, investigators began checking old archives. They found several cases in police reports that had never been fully solved. In the summer of 1993, a couple of fishermen from Fairbanks disappeared near the same valley. Their tent was found torn open on the shore of the lake. Their belongings remained almost intact, but the people themselves were never found. The search lasted for 3 weeks and ended in vain. The second case occurred in October of 2008. 2 experienced hunters went hunting in the Johnson Ridge area and never returned. Their truck was found abandoned on a forest road with maps and personal documents inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, just a silent emptiness around them. The investigators' report states, "Probable death as a result of an accident or attack by a wild animal." However, the locals always had their doubts because the area coincided with the same sector where the Compass House was found years later. Analysts mapped the disappearances and saw that they all occurred within a radius of about 20 miles of the cabin. It was too clear a pattern to be called coincidence. In September of 2022, one of the journalists of the Fairbanks Daily News Miner wrote an article entitled "The Denali Triangle." In it, he collected all the known stories, from the legends of the hermit to incidents with fishermen and hunters. The article caused a real stir. People began to share their own memories. Who saw a strange light in the mountains? Who heard screams at night? Who found abandoned parking lots with no trace of people? The police were reluctant to comment. Officially, all the old cases were marked as closed without results. But discussions began within the department. Could all this be connected? Was there really an unknown factor, a person or group of people who had been active in the region for decades? For Melissa's family, these discoveries had a double effect. On the one hand, they were relieved. Their daughter's disappearance did not look like an accident. It was part of a larger chain. On the other hand, it became even more frightening. If someone real was behind all this, the likelihood that Melissa had remained alive all these years was rapidly decreasing. In late September, investigators announced the creation of a separate working group to analyze all similar cases within a 20-mile radius of the cabin. Thus, the Denali Triangle became an official term in police documents. Although there were no more answers, the geography of the disappearances was strikingly precise, as if someone had chosen this piece of land as their territory. October of 2022. Fall in Alaska was coming into its own. Cold rains, short days, slippery mountain trails. It was these conditions, along with bureaucratic procedures, that postponed the second official visit of forensic experts to the mysterious hut. After the initial inspection in August, it was decided to return with a full set of equipment: generators, lighting, portable laboratories. But transporting all of this deep into the forest required several weeks of preparation, coordination of funding, and weather windows. In late September, a special working group announced that the departure was scheduled for mid-October. This was supposed to be a major milestone in the investigation, a chance to collect clues that could explain who used the cabin and why Melissa Hunt's compass was there. But the day before they left, on October 14, the police received a message from the hunters. The house had burned to the ground. When investigators arrived, they found only black charred logs and still warm ashes. Any potential evidence, fingerprints, biological traces, old household items, had disappeared irrevocably. The fire inspection report states, "The cause of the fire cannot be determined. No traces of lightning or natural ignition were found. The probability of intentional arson is high." The question of who entered the building and how remained unanswered. The only material evidence in the case was a compass with the initials MH, which was seized during the first inspection. It became the symbol of the case, the last thread linking Melissa Hunt to that cabin. In November, the district attorney's office officially announced that despite new efforts, no additional evidence had been found. The case was again reclassified as unsolved. For the police, it was a closed episode. For the people of Healy and the whole of Alaska, it was just the beginning of an even more terrifying legend. The house that burned down in the woods became the personification of mystery. Locals called it the Ghost Cabin. People avoided that part of the park, and tourist guides joked that time stands still there. Melissa's family kept demanding answers, but no one could give them. All they had was the feeling that someone had deliberately taken away their last chance to find out the truth. Melissa Hunt's name was finally included in the list of those whom Alaska hid in its forests. With no explanation, no resolution, only an eerie echo of a burned-out house and a compass that had miraculously survived.